Eric,
Omar,
we got him.
we did it. We've arrived. We captured the big fish for Iron Culture. I tell you what.
Look, Dave, you don't know this, man, but we have so many running gags as it relates to Iron Culture, references we've made along the way. We'll give you just one small example. Somewhere along the way, we've now recorded close to 200 episodes. We made a cinematic masterpiece reference, okay? The film that everyone loves, Stuck Together, we called it, which is actually Stuck on You. It's not, any of the other ones like Dumb and Dumber, any of the classics like Zoolander people reference. It's a niche one. We called it Stuck Together. Apparently, it's Stuck on You. But now, since that time, the film company has changed it to Stuck Together due to our influence. But it just shows we've had this like 3-year journey over that name. But in the same way, this is not an exaggeration, because anyone who's been listening to Iron Culture, anyone that's been following my YouTube channel for the last decade, anyone that listens to Eric, we have referenced you. We've referenced Elite FTS numerous times. Some people regard, Dave, on YouTube as an example, I started in 2009. Channel kind of popped off a decade ago, so maybe 2012, right? And I'm regarded in that pocket as one of the more OGs. Eric started 3DMJ, so he started in 2009. Eric,
Yeah,
2009.
2009.
And for natural bodybuilding, he's really been a pioneer. Him and the 3DMJ crew. He's an OG, no question about it. In terms of that, proliferating the information, unquestionable. You, however, predate us by a large margin, but I don't. That's not an insult. That's actually respect. What I mean is that you're someone who is from that era, that you're literally from almost, I'd say, the inception of what's really important in powerlifting. And I mean no shade when I say, I'm not, no shade to
I know.
anyone in the
I'm
60s.
just wondering that, in my head, I'm wondering, is that like a great OG?
Great, yeah.
Yeah,
It's the OG.
You know how you got like the great grandpa, and I'm trying to think how that all
We would need like
like the great.
yeah, we need like a gangster family tree. So we have the G's, the OGs,
Yeah.
the double OGs, the real triple double doggy OGs.
So,
Yeah.
so Tate's the Dawn, basically, of this syndicate here. And I just want to say, man, it is fantastic to have you on, because it does feel, certainly for Iron Culture, like a full circle moment where we've referenced you and your work and so forth. And even recently, that's what we're going to get into in this episode, what you've been doing with Elite FTS, staying relevant, but things like the podcast, the table talk that you do, the nuanced conversations that you're still having. It's not only what you've done in the past, it's what you're also currently doing, and certainly what it seems like the vision is of the future. That is cool how you've managed to, be intertwined within the culture all these years.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah, 100%. It's most recently, what led us to really want to make sure we got you on the podcast was how it doesn't happen often. And so this may seem like nothing to someone who doesn't pay attention, but you had Greg Knuckles on, and you guys chatted. Greg Knuckles, obviously, good friend of mine, colleague. I write mass with him. I've known him since 2014, and he's probably, if we're OGs and you're double OGs, he's just a G, I think.
Yeah. You guys, I don't know, man. You guys have done great things with mass, so that's OG.
It's honorary. We're getting grandfathered into having that pristine quality, even though we've only been around 5 years. I appreciate that. But the fact that you did that is something that you, unfortunately, I think, due to egos, a lot of the times in the fitness industry, doesn't happen enough. Where sometimes I think people who they see new people come on the scene, or there's these slow changes of the guard, and it doesn't have to be a change of the guard. Obviously, like, you are still extremely relevant in what you're doing. You're still, making content. But I do notice that as people see new people come on the block, there tends to be a resistance. Sometimes it can be a resistance to ideas, as, hey, things are changing a little bit, and I'm not comfortable with that. So I'm going to dismiss not just the ideas, but sometimes the people. And I don't know whether that comes from a sense of territorialness, or not knowing where your place in the community is, or perhaps just putting yourself first rather than the community, which I think does sometimes happen. But you've never been that. And you've always struck me as someone who is has a lot of humility, but also has a ton of experience. And it both come across when you communicate. And I've always really respected that, because when someone seems to have all of the answers, you know they're probably missing a lot of the answers because they've had their blinders on.
Well, they have none of the answers, right? Because the more you learn this shit, the more you realize there's so much more to know, and the rabbit holes that you can go down. I mean, you guys have done this. The rabbit holes you can go down just get so vast and so deep, and it's like, oh shit, I don't know anything. Now there seems to be in this industry, and maybe it's others, I don't know because I'm not in those others, that as somebody begins their process of training and learning, they go through this arc, and as they're coming up the curve, they learn the bro science and, what I would call my OG days, the magazine information, or, the low hanging fruit, easy information to gather. And then they start to think that they know what they're doing. And they make some progress because they're making beginner gains and stuff like that. Then as they start to come up that arc a little bit, they learn a little bit more. They get a hold of different resources. Maybe they hear people quote science type of things. And so they get a little bit more knowledgeable, which is a great thing. It's perfect. That's what you're supposed to do, is to become knowledgeable. But then at some point on that arc, they start to learn physical therapy stuff and bigger terms, the use of language that's going to make them sound more impressive in their mind and maybe to some people. And so they just keep learning, and the higher they start to get up on this curve before they peak, they think they fucking know everything, right? And they do. They know a lot. They know how to throw big words around. They know how to position themselves. They know how to make themselves look smart. And then once they start coming down the back end of the curve, and usually it's that top of the curve where most of them will get there and realize why it's like imposter syndrome. They start to realize, now, wait a minute, if I really knew what the fuck I was knowing, I'd have better results than I'd have. I'd be financially better off than what I have. So maybe I don't know what the fuck that I'm doing. And so then they start to come down the back end of the curve, not saying that they're learning more, but they go from education to wisdom. So now they start to come down the back end of the curve. Then they realize on the other side, it's back at the very bottom of this curve. It's the same thing you started with. Just one person went to learn how to get stronger in a weight room through a training meets, and when you look back, and I look back at all this, and I look at, people like Greg and, even some of them coming up today, I try to plant, where are they on this curve? Because if you get them at the wrong place on the curve, and say if it's somebody I'm sponsoring or somebody you highlight, then you're going to get somebody that's just going to sound like an egotistical dickhead, and nobody's going to want to listen to them because they haven't learned that nuance matters, or they know a nuance matters, but they don't want to admit it because they think it's going to hurt their positioning, in the marketplace. And so you want to find those people that are, towards the top of the curve, or actually more on the back end of the curve. And the reason why I've never had what you're talking about is we can talk about any training modality that you'd want to talk about. And I'm sure there's going to be nuances that we're not going to agree with. It's a small percentage of the nuance. At the most, let's say it's 10%, maybe 15%. There's 85% that everybody agrees, probably more, to be honest. It's probably like 90, 95% of all the things that everybody agrees upon. We all admit that. Everybody admits that. But what they fail to admit is maybe you're the wrong messenger for the population that you're standing in front of right now. So we need these younger people to come up, because we need younger messengers, because the OGs, the 54-year-old, the 65-year-old, the 75-year-old, they're not going to relate to that 23, 24, 25-year-old or 18-year-old the same way. That they need that 30-year-old that's somewhere up a little bit higher on that curve to be able to transfer that information onto them. But a lot of times what happens is you get the screaming idiots on the other end, that don't realize that, first off, shut up about the nuances, because it only impacts a very small percentage of the population. If you can't get across that 85 or 90% that really matters to a certain demographic, then who cares who does it? They're doing it. So do you really care about the industry and the people that we're trying to help or not? Because don't tell me that you are, if you're not embracing what I'm saying right now. Because then what that becomes is, What you really give a fuck about is how you can monetize the market, which is fine. That's understandable. I get that position, but don't stand behind this I care more than everybody else bullshit when it's very obvious what it is.
Omar, did we just invite someone who has inspired us in our souls from time immemorial, that maybe we didn't even understand the depths that we were inspired onto the podcast to say what is in our hearts? Because I feel like that's what just happened.
100%. No, this is Dave. This is why you are the perfect guest man for Iron Culture, and it's called Iron Culture Podcast. It's history, culture, science. It's for all lifters. We try and have that umbrella. Eric jokes like Eric's done bodybuilding, but he's done just as much powerlifting. We're interested in all different disciplines, but more than that, it is that insatiable curiosity on both of our parts to learn more. And we see within you. So let's go back a little bit, because I think that was perfect to frame, Eric, where you brought up Greg Knuckles, because not that I think it's a false dichotomy, but Greg has been hugely influential in terms of his work, Strong by Science, so, and before that one, it was Strength Theory, like many different things. But there was that old guard, because some of the things, like let's say his article on the hamstrings not really mattering on the squat, so on and so forth, just all these little things, the Reddit, debates, but it's super hip on your part to have someone like Greg in the modern context. But let's go back, man, 20 years ago, what was super cool, and this is not even scratching the surface of the real beginning, but one of the ways that I first discovered you, I said that on T Nation, but was also, it was before your body transformation with John Berardi, but you did, like, some of the choices that you've always made, I've found along your journey, it's always being ahead of the curve and keeping an open mind. As Eric said, you have so much experience, but you're very comfortable parking that in the back seat and then just, interacting with someone else, learning a little bit more. Oh, okay, this is what it takes. And I remember, man, those transformation photos, because we focus sometimes on aesthetics here, that you did with John when you got lean, where it was super impressive. And as someone that started that, I was on that journey, I bulked up this and that, seeing that transformation and through your lens, and how then you interpret, internalize, and then convey it back. It's always been fantastic, man. So maybe for you, let's start close to the start then for yourself, because I'm wondering that aspect, the curiosity to always learn more. Was it there from the inception? How did it take me back to maybe the start of Dave as a lifter before EliteFTS and everything else, and the key pivotal things that shaped you? I know that's a long journey. There's a lot of things to discuss,
I can condense it a little bit. I grew up in it was a different age, obviously. So, when I was in grade school, we're talking the 70s and stuff like that. So I grew up in special ed classes, so back then it was just learning disability. Now there's probably 800 different things that you could tag to it, from dyslexia to all this other kind of stuff. So to make a long story short, I've never been the smartest person in the room, and so through that time period and getting beat up all the time. I mean, it's people talk about getting bullied. I'm getting my ass kicked like every fucking day. And then at a certain point in time, I joined wrestling just to be able to defend myself, because after a while it kind of sucks. At least if I on the ground I could get the fuck out and run away or something like that. And after the first year of wrestling, I was introduced to just like a universal machine, just weight training. I didn't really care that much about the weightlifting. I just did it because it was, part of practice, and I was getting beat all the time. So I just figured, I'm not only am I stupid, but I'm also not good at sports and that kind of. But then after a few months, I was like stacking everything on the machine. And I'm like, well, wait a minute, nobody else is doing this. Like maybe this is going to help me. Then I started to wrestle better. And then soon after that, my father, my uncle, it was a big family gathering. Somebody gave me a weight set, the plastic sand plates and stuff. And I used to spend 3 hours in the garage just doing every exercise. I've had this book that you buy at the bookstore of like every exercise. I feel it's stupid shit, but I think a lot of us go through this, like 35 exercises. You're out there for 5 hours, 3 sets of 10. And so it wasn't long after that my dad, I was also getting a lot of trouble at the time, because as I started to get a little bit stronger, how do I want to say this? Paybacks became a little bit more important, to me than other things, like going back to some of the people, whatever you want to call it, which is, wrong, but at the time it was getting me in a lot of trouble. So he put me in this small private gym called Finley Barbell Club because a lot of cops were running the gym. And that was when I was 13. And so as soon as I got in there, I started training for a powerlifting. It was a powerlifting gym. So just by, you can say, the grace of God, luck, whatever it is, that's just where I ended up, and then fell right into this powerlifting shit. And then the powerlifting, man, it gave me the strength from the powerlifting, right? And the competing gave me self-confidence I never had before, pride, I never had before, respect from other people, because now I'm bigger, and I was growing too. So not like growing fat, growing like jacked, so I finished high school at 255, and, calipers, 3-side calipers back then was like science, that was like advanced shit, was like still 10, 11%, so I went from the person everybody used to fuck with to the person nobody wanted to fuck with, so that impact was huge for me. But the other part of all this is those guys who were helping me with the training back then, they didn't have to do that. They didn't have to take the time to say, here's how you do these lifts. Here's how you train for a meet. They didn't have to drive me 3 hours to a meet, to be able to, on their own time, on a weekend, to be able to help with all that. Those guys changed who I was, because I was going down a path that wasn't going to end well. It was not a good path. I mean, just project out, you got a kid that's getting D's and F's in class, and he's beating the shit out of everybody he could find, and now all of a sudden this pivoted me, didn't change my grades, but it pivoted me to the point where it was like, you know what, I'm not going to drink, because if I drink, then my body is going to have to recover and get rid of the alcohol overnight instead of recover from the training. I need to get stronger, so everything became about that training. And from there, that catapulted and helped determine, two things happened at that time. Everybody that was close to me told me, what are you doing this training shit for? What's it going to do for your life? You do other, you need to do other things. Like, what, you need a different hobby. You need to do something else. Don't do, that all. There, one, maybe two people, said, yeah, sure, roll with this. And so barely graduated high school, got through high school, and then flunked out my first year of, I had to go to Tiffin University, which is a small business school. And I don't say this a lot because it adds to the story, but none of the college credits I took there counted, because it was things like English, algebra, biology. Keep in mind, most people take these classes in high school. I took rock science, I took business math, I took basic reading. So I had to take these other classes just to be able to take college classes. And in college, I don't know why, what prompted me to want to go, and to be there, because, I don't know, parents pushing me, I don't know. But I got through that first year, and I'm like, you know what, maybe I'm not that dumb, because I didn't flunk out. At least I got C's, and I got enough to get the fuck out of this school and go to Bowling Green State University, which was bigger. Then I flunked out. So I flunked out my first semester there. And I tell this because this is a pivotal thing, because I found something called a library there, which is, it's funny, you'll laugh about it, but it's dead serious. I never stepped in a library until then. And it was only because of the girlfriend I was with at the time. And so while she was studying, because I wasn't going to do that, I found the International Journal of Sport Nutrition, the Soviet Sport Science Review, the NSCA journal, both of the NSCA journals, and was like, holy shit. She'd be studying for 3 hours. I'd be sitting in the bookshelves just reading this shit, and then making photocopies of all the relevant stuff that could help me with the powerlifting. So after I flunked out, I went back to my hometown, went to I would help the football team a little bit with strength and conditioning. So I went out to help the football team, and my old wrestling coach was there, and he asked me, how's school going? And I said, I just all into this powerlifting shit. I'm like, man, listen, I learned this shit, like this linear stuff we were doing, that it's cool and it works, but, we can kind of like block orient this a little bit more, and we can, and we can put these other things in there. And, maybe we can put in like plyometrics where we're pushing a heavy boxing bag, what I'm talking about, the heavy, my brain's not working right now. Med bag throws, stuff like that. And so I'm just going on. He's like, no, you're not listening to me. You're not listening to me. I asked you, how is school going? And I said, I didn't work out, man. I think they were right all along. I'm back home. I'm just going to be working in one of the factories like, predestined to do. And, but, there's a gym, at least I can do this. I think I can be good with this powerlifting thing, because that was still going very well. And he looked at me and he said, the problem with you is that you've believed what everybody's told you your whole life. He says, you're not stupid. You're just fucking lazy. And swear straight up truth, man. And it pissed me off. I mean, it made me fucking mad. I was like, fuck you, went to my car. I'm driving home, pulled over about 10 minutes down the road, pulled off the side of the road, probably cried for an hour. And because I didn't know if he was right or wrong, that bothered me. So when I talked to him again, I asked him, like, what do you mean? And he says, look, I had the same learning disabilities and all this other stuff. I just had to read things 3 or 4 times. Everybody else could read it once or twice. I had to read it 3 or 4 times. I'm like, okay, fuck, when I go back, I'm not going to take any class that I failed. That way I'm not going to fail out again. And I'm certainly not going to retake it, because I'm not an idiot. Because if I retake it, fail it, then there's a problem. I'm just going to take classes I like and see how it goes from there. 5-6 years later, I end up graduating with a 3.75 exercise and nutrition. Now, there's a lot of things going on in there, but he was right. It took me a little bit longer. So when you're talking about training and my history of training and why I do what I do and where this live, learn, pass on comes from, that's it. That wrestling coach didn't have to say that to me. That was brutal honesty. Had he not said that, I'd be making Sunny Delight orange juice in Findlay, Ohio. Had they not helped me in that weight room, I wouldn't be sitting here with you today either. Then this just carries all the way through to, meeting Louis Simmons and then going to Westside Barbell and, everything that transfers there. So to me, this training thing, it isn't about the nuances, man. It's about the white space. Nobody wants to talk about it. It's this stuff. It's how it can change people's lives, because how many other people can hear this message and then it helps them, to become something more than they ever thought they could be. So that's in a nutshell where that comes from, how it got into EliteFTS, and all the other stuff. That was, I'm going to skip through a lot of years because there's a lot of history here. When coming to Westside was made a pivotal point, because it was right after I graduated from college. I tore my pec a month before graduating, and I had the 3 years before graduating were rough for powerlifting. Keep in mind that, don't misunderstand anything I'm saying. Powerlifting was still my number one priority by far. Everything else was a vast second. But I was having a rough stretch, man, and my professors weren't able to help. And some of the things they were saying sounded so fucking stupid to me. And some of them were, but some of them, looking back in hindsight, were kind of right, but just didn't frame it the way it needed to be framed. And I kept getting hurt, and they weren't like major injuries. It's just like, well, here's a pec strain. Here's another pec strain. Here's another pec strain. Here's a bicep strain. Here's a quad strain. Fortunately, none of them strain, tear. It's all the same thing, right? It's just to what degree. None of them were so bad that they were debilitating or would take more than a week or two to recover from. But it was like, good God, man. It's like every time something started to go the right way, wham, there was something else. And it's like, the fuck is going on? Even bodybuilding for a couple of years to try to build my base. I'm like, well, if I can just get bigger, add more muscle mass, kind of take that hypertrophy phase that I used to do for a couple of months, would make it 2 years, and then put it in there. I go a weight class higher, then I come back, my first meet back, I totaled 200 pounds less. And that's where, you know, Louis really, I've known Louis since he would help me in the back room of meets when I was a kid, 13, but not on a personal level, just as was always, he didn't have to take him, Matt Dunwell, these guys, they didn't have to take the time to help a fucking 13, 14, 15-year-old kid, you know, with just stupid shit. You know, even Ed Cohn helping me with my sumo deadlift in one of these meets in the warm-up room. And keep in mind, I'm not breaking records and shit. I mean, it's just a kid that's definitely strong for my age. I'm not going to lie about that, but not to that point. Louis at that meet, and it was a Toledo Open meet, it was him and Vogelpohl, came up and said, you know, what the fuck happened? I'm like, what are you talking about? I was like, well, you disappeared for a couple of years. And I didn't want to tell him I was doing bodybuilding shows. I just said, you know, look, you know, school got crazy and, you know, work got a little crazy. And, you know, I want to put more muscle on and stuff like that. He says, no, he says, you're so much bigger, but you're weak as fuck. Like, you know, he said it in Louis, you know, like you're weak, you're weak as dog piss or some stupid thing like that. And I'm like, dude, I don't understand. I'm like, I bench fucking 405 for 17 reps, you know, coming into this training cycle, and I'm fucking benching 420 here and barely make it, you know, like what the hell? And he's going on about this stupid conjugate, stupid, you know, the dynamic shit and all this stuff. I wasn't buying any of it, you know, so I wasn't, man. I just spent 4 years reading all this other shit. And so he's like, you need to come to Westside. You need to come to Westside. And then my pec tore and it had to be reattached. So this was like the first really big one. And I'm like, you know what? Maybe this is a sign. I mean, usually I'd have a couple bad years and you have a good year. Couple bad years are good. It's just kind of there's ebbs and flows, you know, of bodybuilding, powerlifting, and all that. And I wasn't getting the upside. It's like, man, come on. It's like, this should pop here soon, and it's not popping. I don't fucking know why. So maybe I'm done, you know, because at 13, and now that's probably 10 years in, you know, a decade in, I'm falling apart. You know, everything hurts like a mother. I mean, just hurts. You know, not like now. You know, not like now. The way I hurt is completely different than back then. But like, you got hit by a truck all the time. And then I ended up sitting down with him and had a conversation about, you know, is this how I want to leave the sport? And all I remember is when I left speaking with him is I asked myself a question walking in my car. I'm like, you know, what if I don't do this? And that's all I had to say, because that what if has bothered the fuck out of me. I'm like, I can't leave and say what if. I've already got 10 years into this. This has formed my whole fucking life. It's formed my education, my degree, my passion, everything. I will not walk away asking what if. So if I go back, then those are the two words I'm never going to ask when this is over, is that. And so then that's how I ended up at Westside. Was I got the surgery for the pec, ended up there, and first couple months I'm in a body sling, you know, taped with they do things different now than they did then. They were paranoid I was going to fuck it up more, so I think they body casted me. And but still, I fought Louis hard for the first year. Almost got kicked out because what he was telling me made no goddamn sense. I'm like, and it got to a point where it was in his car. He had this, you know, trooper, and we're going back and forth about stuff. And I'm like, he kept talking about these fucking Soviet books, and you know, you listen to Louis talk. I'm like, well, show me these. Quit talking about these fucking books and show them to me, because I didn't fucking believe he had them. I'm like, yeah, I told him, like, you're just making this shit up, you know, because I've not fucking seen them. I can't find them. You know, I'm looking, I'm calling people, like, where the fuck do you buy these Russian manuals? Like, what the fuck does that even mean? And you know what I'm saying? I'm like, yeah. I just went through like fucking 8 years of the Soviet sports review, and I know what's in there, which is predominantly all block type of stuff. I didn't read no shit on dynamic effort method or conjugate, or now I did read concurrent, you know, but I didn't read this other shit. And so then he gave me all the translated text, which were almost like a nightmare. to go through there. But I was able to at least go through there enough to be able to see. I see how Louis sees this, right? I'm not saying that I still would agree with what it was. It's like now I see where he interpreted this from. Like I see how this Prelipin's chart is being interpreted by him. Here's where it is. Here's what it's used for. Here's how he's interpreting it. Do I necessarily agree with the way that he's presenting it? I don't know enough to know one way or another, but I see where it's coming from. And then that was enough for me to buy in and say, okay, look, I'm going to come in the morning crew. I'm going to change my work, change my clients, and just do what everybody else is in there doing. And my total went up 250 pounds in the first year. So I can sit there and say the buy-in was a huge part of that. The culture was a huge part of that. The competitiveness was a huge part of that. The training was also a huge part of that. But there's a lot of nuances that gets left out, especially when you're trying to explain. Like I've said a million times, you're not really doing Westside unless you're at Westside. And I don't think people really know what that means. And it's really hard to explain. But the way that I've found success trying to explain it is Louis would always say we're 3 or 4 weeks out from a meet. I don't agree with that. That's not true, right? Because we would have, and he would also say that what we were doing isn't really phasic. That's also not really true. We had 3-week dynamic squat phases. Actually, it was 5 when I got there. Then it went into 3. And the whole training's based upon that squat phase. So the max effort exercises are kind of, it changes every single week, kind of, not all the time, but most of the time. But everything revolves around that 3-week, which you could call a block, just saying, but it could be called a block. And then going into a meet, those last couple blocks going into the meet, peaking, they're going to be a little different. It may have the bands, it may have the chains, or just may be heavier loads, or it may be loads that you actually worked up after your work sets. And then God forbid there were 2 weeks, deload weeks, right after those 3-week phases to get ready for the meet. So, say 70, I'm just going to throw percents out as an example. So say, 80% week 1, 70% week 3, week 2, week 3 is the week of the meet that's off. There's the peak. Oh, then guess what? After the meet, you're going back to a normal, the phase goes back to the original phase for the squat going. You see, so there was a lot of phasic structure being put into the whole thing that I don't think was being conveyed very well, because there were also still a bunch of guys that just fucking maxed out all the time, which that's where, that's just part of that competitiveness there. But getting back to what I was saying, Louis was a big, so when I go through my life and I sit there and say, who are these influencing factors on what EliteFTS is now, that's how it all pulls together. Fuck, without Louis, I wouldn't be selling product. I was helping him with seminars and consulting gigs for a few years, and then he just got sick of doing them, and just Louis thought, you just fucking do them. I'm like, fine, I'll do them. I didn't realize I wasn't gonna make any fucking money doing them, but it was a break even thing. But that's business. That's kind of how it all works. And working as a trainer too. So there's this false misconception that everybody at Westside just sold drugs and it didn't work. I worked 10-hour days. I had between 45 and 50 billable hours as a personal trainer per week my whole time there. Now, keep in mind, if you've ever worked in a gym, billable hours you're there a lot more than what that is. There's hours you're not getting paid because people cancel, and you get what I'm saying. So with Louis, she said something to my wife in the gym one time. She was bitching about her job. And I was already doing these consulting type of things. And so, well, why don't you just sell my shit? You already have the business set up. And at the time, it was like the Man Array, which is a squat thing for a barbell. I think a front squat harness, squat belt, sled. No, there are a few other incidental items. Not a lot, maybe $4,000 worth of stuff. We gave it to us on consignment, which helped, obviously, because we didn't have any money, to be able to with some, but not enough to be able to buy that. And then I had to borrow $1,000 to be able to buy sleds, and then that was kind of the start of Elite FTS as what people see, where my primary goal going into the whole thing was always, and still always is today, is we are in an industry that is a strength equipment industry, but that's not what we do. What we do is we provide as much complimentary content as we absolutely can. And we use the profits from the content or from the products to pay for the content, because the shit's not cheap. I mean, you start putting in editors and staff members for this, and then back then bandwidth was a huge thing. Thank God. I mean, some things have changed, but paying for bandwidth before YouTube and shit like that was a motherfucker too. Server space was a motherfucker. So that's what Elite FTS is, and that's still what it is today. Is where I could have went the other direction. And I would be lying if I haven't stopped and thought, if I would have went the other direction, could I have helped more people, right? The other direction would be monetize the content. It's got a higher profit margin, way higher profit margin, which would allow for a greater reach, more marketing dollars, more all that. When you sell an equipment, you're dealing with small margins. My net margin is under 4%, so you're dealing with very, very small net margins. You got to pay for the product. People don't understand this, but where I always kind of come back with that is, if I would have went the other route, would I have lasted 25 years? Right now, I've been around long enough and seen the industry long enough to know that very few people that go that straight hard content route. Most of them don't make it. Let's just assume that I would have made it, right? Most of them don't make it, and if they do, it's usually about a 3 or 5 year stretch. Then it can get really hard. They got to reinvent themselves, and I'm not too sure, because of how much bullshit people sling around, if that 3 or 5 years is going to generate enough revenue for them to be able to not have to work again. So there's the pros and the cons.
Man, that's have we not talked about the whole problems of looping in because being a content creator as your primary modality of income, especially in the social media age, I think it's made the problem you described, Dave, is worse. It requires this level of activity, transparency, and melding of your personality, your actual who you are, and then who you're seen as. And I think people can get really lost in that. I think the likes, the comments, and the popularity, or sometimes the drama, becomes something that they can't help but internalize. And I think, honestly, for someone who's who started as a pure content creator and did it kind of the opposite way, Omar's a great example. He started with doing YouTube, and then eventually got to the point where he was doing Rascal Apparel, position shoes, all the various ventures you've had, Omar. So I would actually love, can I ask Omar a question here?
Yes.
How do you see what Dave is talking about from the perspective of someone who did it the opposite order, I guess,
So what's so funny, Dave, I think you've done so many things right along the way. And I think keeping your content free is pivotal, because I'm not going to name names. I think I know exactly what you're talking about, in the sense that what the 3 to 5 year arc, you would monetize the content via, let's say, an info product, which actually was especially hot over 10 years ago. All I'll say, because I don't want to name specific people, but there's someone up here in Canada, as an example, where they became a guru of particular type of training, built their audience, had a digital product, and I know all the marketers. Actually, Eric went with myself to people that we knew. They're having some sort of entrepreneur get together up here in Canada. Anyways, nonetheless, you're right. So Dave, I think the two things you're absolutely right on. First, that it becomes a cycle, because inevitably, no matter what, due to the monetary compensation, you you want to make your money. They make a certain amount of money. You do burn some bridges. Not with your customers don't hate you, but once they buy the offer and once they buy the extended offer, which is like maybe the like one-on-one coaching or like, and like I am going to crack the joke like Ripito has in Wichita Falls, you go visit him or like whatever. There is some fracturing that eventually occurs once you start tiering some of the offers, that eventually will lead to a fall off of your audience. And I'll just say one quick thing to what you said, Dave, about a lot of people sling shit. The claims of some of the money that some of the people have made, I'll just say from maybe some of the inside information, I also don't feel that some of it is true, because I wouldn't have seen, as an example, someone who after their heyday from a decade ago, still working as like a consultant, let's say at a gym that I know, if they really made their like 7 figures that they did doing their info products. Yeah. So so I'd say, man, it's impossible for us to know with 100% certainty if those that like rode off into the sunset. But even more than that, I think what is far more poignant with your story, and that's why I know a lot of those parts from reading your articles, is the idea of live, learn, like pass on, that what you're doing is invaluable. Like you can't put a monetary number on that. And by making the content free, by helping to educate people, bring on other people, being a conduit for all the different aspects of the culture, you're passing on, which brings up the next generation. And if we say it's like a connected chain, right? So you had, as an example, like your wrestling coach who was pivotal for you, so on and so forth. You create the content, I read the content, Eric reads the content, we make content, someone else learns it, and so on and so forth. Is that the hidden like true value, I'd say, from a societal level, like overall raising like the fitness IQ, the culture, like everything else, man, is another level. And I'll just say the last thing in short summation, 2 things. One, billable hours. People, no one here, unless you've been a trainer, I know 1,000% what you're talking about. 45 to 50 hours per week is an insane amount of work, which I actually found one of the most impressive parts. In the gym. Because it's like you're basically in the gym for 70 to 80 hours, that means, because it's everything in between. But the point is that the hard work that you put in everything else, highly commendable. But the thing that I wanted to say is that I think for you and everything that you've done, keeping the content free has been pivotal in terms of the lasting power that you have and having those necessary conversations. Because when you start to monetize, it does gatekeep who can access it. Your compensation, I know you're saying in terms of your margins for equipment, it would be far higher because you could then sell info products and everything else. But your net impact, so you lose the straight up money, but your overall impact and staying power, I think, goes up. And one of the things in closing, I'll say is that I was careful about, I started YouTube for fun, creating content because I enjoyed it. I was training people. So Dave, I said in 2008, when I first started off as a trainer, there's a challenge. You want to talk, there's key parts of your story that were 100% I could identify with, where it's like I started working as a trainer. There was a challenge they had, Eric, who can have the most billable hours. And this was so the company wants to make money. Dave, I'm getting paid $16 an hour, man. They're charging people $75. I'm a young kid though. I don't care. So I want to win this thing. Like, who could get the most billable hours? Dave, you get at the end of it for the month. If you broke the record, you got an extra $200. Whatever. At this time, I don't care. I'm a kid. I'm hungry to prove it. There's all these older people. They're talking. They're slinging their shit. A lot of people with bad information. I was that kid that was reading like T Nation and whatnot. I knew what was up. Like, like the strength guys like John Berardi. Anyways, I ended up working 238 billable hours in a month. And it ended up, so you just do the math, that company made like $12,000 extra, whatever the amount. I got paid $200. It was a win for me because I showed that. I was like, oh, that's what's up. But the point of me saying that is that I started, much like the content that you did, I did it for fun. Because I was training the general population. I was interested in performance. I never thought how to monetize it until I was like, oh, this is kind of crazy. Like, there's an audience watching this. As you know, it's expensive to create this content. So I'll just say in short summary, man, because I want to hear much more from you. I think you've done it right. Like, I think your choices, I think they're right. Yeah. And that's why the table talk, what I love to see and what we both love to see, myself and Eric, is the Dawn, the OG, triple OG, coming back. Like, the content you're putting out with EliteFTS is still highly influential. And I don't know people that have 25 years of staying power, you know?
Yeah. Well, another point before we move on to the next subject that was explained to me, I think Mark Dugdale explained it to me, many years ago, because, I called him in a rant about something. And, he reminded me so eloquently that I was reaping the harvest of the seeds that people like Eddie Cohn, Louis Simmons, Bill Kazmaier, people that came before me that made zero money in this industry. Zero. They just did it because they loved it. They helped people in warm-up rooms because that's just what they did. They helped people in gyms. That's just because of what they did. They planted, the grass I was playing on. They planted the trees I was leaning against. The trees that provided shade and all this other kind of stuff. So I always think that it's important that we keep putting in that harvest, right? Because I took the foundation that they have and maybe I put some swing sets in there, planted some more trees, planted some bushes, put some other stuff out there. And what worries me is when those green areas that you'll see in a lot of cities get paved over with concrete because nobody, is planting the seeds for the future generation. If there's anything that concerns me now with what I'm seeing with the industry is who's planting the seeds for the future generation, right? Because everything is about monetization. And trust me, I understand that. I'm hustling my ass off to get sponsors for the podcast. I have sponsors for the podcast. It's finding that happy balance, that happy medium. But I think people need to ask themselves, what are we putting out there for not just the people who are listening to us now, but the people that are going to listen to them? Like, what are they going to say? What are they going to do? What are their actions going to be? And all this strength training, powerlifting shit aside, we still have a health problem, a major fucking health problem. In America, 100%, way worse than the rest. Now, I don't travel the world that much, so I don't know. But in America, there's a big fucking health problem. There's a nutrition problem. There's a diet problem. There's an exercise problem. There's all kinds of problems. And if everybody becomes, say, 2 generations from us, so wrapped up into, I'm not going to, help anybody unless they're going to pay us, you think that's going to get better or worse? Because it's already gotten worse on our watch. You got to think about that for a minute. A lot of people bitch about how bad things have gotten in society with health and nutrition and obesity. They forget this is on our watch, right? Especially if we're in the 40s or 50s. We're part of that. We're part of that problem. Now we're part of a solution for many people too, but we contribute to that. It's kind of like the participation trophies with the people in my age group. Like, so you do understand that you're the person that was given the fucking trophy, all right? You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
They're like all these kids with the participation trophies. I'm like, dude, weren't you the one fucking handing it out?
Yeah.
So it's that accountability, that self accountability that I think people lack.
Yeah, there's a lot to be discussed here, and I think it's like we could take that podcast there, and I think it'd be good. Don't get me wrong, but I think there's a lot of ground to cover. So I will just say though that I agree with Omar. I think despite the scarily low margins and probably the sense of financial insecurity that comes with that at times, being able to keep content free, it allows you to change your mind much more freely and without potential influence.
100%. I'm glad you said that, because that was kind of running through my mind as something I wanted to put out there is, obviously we all have our training biases, but I'm so open and so flexible because I'm not tied to it for my income. So, that's where, because I live in these different worlds. Like, I'm in a bubble, but they're still different worlds. I also have, people in my demographic, man, would you have that person on? He doesn't know a goddamn thing about training, because they don't know Westside or whatever. And I'm like, rolling, like, dude, what the fuck? Maybe you don't fucking know anything. It's like, there's, again, going back to what I'm saying, first off, we agree on 90% of it, but let's talk about the 10% we don't fucking agree on, because I've been doing this long enough to understand there's a lot of misinterpretation in there. First off, let's clean out the misinterpretation. And then, you know what? I'm probably going to learn something. I know that for a fact because I've been doing this for 25 years. I'm going to learn something. Now, if the other person learns something, I'm sure they will too, but I know I will. And that's just that one wacky world, that we kind of live in, where people just get so stuck in their bias. And thank God, I don't have to worry about that if I'm doing a podcast or an interview like this and somebody wants to push back on me about certain things. I'm like, whatever, dude. I don't even use this shit anyhow. I quit using that 8 years ago. I do something else. But would I be able to do that? If that was tied into a paywall and a site with a program and all this other stuff, it becomes a really weird thing.
Yeah. And I think the only people who I see do that successfully is when the aspect of the content they're making and the marketing that's tied to it is inherently about updating beliefs and having new information. And, personally, as a scientist, as someone who's in academia, because that's married into my training and my psychology and my interests, I see some people who, because there's nothing wrong with taking an experience-based approach. I think there's more probably, there's probably a quicker getting to making gains pathway than going, all right, let me learn how to read a paper. Okay, let me figure out what a set is. Just having your friend take you to the gym and teaching you the basics is how most of us did start. And to be clear, it's the most efficient way to go, and you'll get most of the information right. And the problem, though, is that you can get to the point where, okay, I saw what works for me. I saw what worked for my group of people who are like me. Now I want to start selling this. I become a trainer. And that can be the point where your learning stops because you feel like I have to only promote these things, whether consciously or subconsciously. And I think the only reason why myself and some others in the quote unquote evidence-based community can circumvent that trap is because when the science changes, we change. And it's kind of intrinsically tied to it. And we're not selling a system. We're selling, let me help you interpret the science so you can apply it. And some people straddle the line with having a system and being science-based, and you see them sometimes get in trouble. Some do it better than others. But I do see more often than not when people have a dogmatic approach, which I think money sometimes pushes them towards, they fall into these traps and they eventually become either irrelevant or they have to just really go hard on their base. And now they've just kind of capped their business model. And unfortunately, just not helping as many people. So I'll leave it there, but yeah.
Ignorance plays a role in there too. They just don't know what they don't know and are unwilling, to look, and that's why I like having Greg on and stuff like that, because I'm gonna learn things. I'm still that meathead. I'm still that 13-year-old competitive powerlifter, man. I love this shit. I learn it and I absorb it differently than other people. Like, I don't give a fuck how I can recite whatever I'm going to say. Even when I was sitting in classrooms, I'm just trying to figure out how can I use what they're saying, right? Because my brain's not going to remember it that way anyhow. And it's how can and I'm always processing that. And I've learned how to do and read the studies, and you guys do that. Fuck that. That's not fun. I admire the work that you guys do, but it's like the word research that people throw around makes me roll my fucking eyes because they have no idea what they're talking about. I don't want to go on a rant about that, but you have to prep before you even fucking do research. It's not just like typing a thing in Google. Like, what are you? I'll stop because evidence-based. Evidence-based is another a really weird term for me too, because it provides an assumption to something that already doesn't have an assumption. Like, evidence is a word that makes you think that that's 100% correct, but science is not 100%. It's evolving, So it's just it is what it is. But fortunately, I think that's such a small little part of what goes on in these industries. It just becomes more visibly seen to a lot of us because it's in front of us. But once you get behind that, right? So go to, I don't want to say any commercial gym, but go to any serious training gym, not a private gym, any serious training gym. Man, nobody in there is going to give first off, they're not going to know who the fuck any of us are. They don't give a fuck about most of the powerlifting, the nuances of strength and conditioning. They just want to know, and they're just there because they love to train. They want to get in shape. They want to get a little stronger. They don't give a fuck about the nuances. They just like the basics. You know what, guys? I try to tell this to everybody. That right there is 90% of the demographics that's listening to us all. I think we forget that. And we get lost in this other stuff because it's fun to talk about the other stuff too. Let's not lie. I mean, it is fun. It's interesting, but that's not where the base is. The base is in the people that just they're doing it because they love it. You know, sometimes I wonder if the nuances that gets thrown around is making them not love it.
I think for some people that's absolutely the case. And it's, that is one thing I do think people in the evidence-based community are often victims of, is that, like, if we think about it, if that potential for marketing can influence your ethics, your self-honesty, either consciously or subconsciously, because now that's how you put food on the table. I have seen many evidence-based content producers who make good content, and the content's accurate. I look at it as a scientist and I go, that's an accurate interpretation. But the marketing sometimes will try to over-justify the importance of it, you know? And I can't tell you how often, and some of it's the personality of the people involved. Like, if you're out there looking for science-based information, you might be a little more neurotic than the average person. But I don't think that's all of it. I can't tell you how often I have people come to me and they are paralyzed by the amount of things that they're trying to quote-unquote optimize, and this laundry list of things that they've heard because of some last name et al. 2013, 2020, 2019, 2022, and they don't have any sense of what is relevant to them, a hierarchy of importance, what is not relevant, which were things that really the effort that you put into it is not even going to be worth the outcome, and compile that all together. You know, it's basically coming down to the marketing, where it's the same that you'll see with the clickbait stuff to get you to watch some video that's not evidence informed, but now those marketing techniques are being used to sell people on this fear of missing out if you're not staying up with the research. And it's a tough one to push back against, because I do think people should stay up with the research, but I think it needs to be contextualized that, yeah, we're talking about that 15%. And that's the most you're going to get out of it. You could have the most super scientific, you know, you could go to the future and see what are we going to be doing in 50 years, do all of that, and you'll make marginally better gains than what you have today. And I think people, that's a difficult message, where I think it conflicts with saying, and then please subscribe or buy my thing. But I think if you're honest about it, there's a lot of people who do want to maximize that 15%, and but I think that's where the bias comes in with the monetization, even in the evidence-based crowd, for sure.
Mm-hmm. No, I would agree.
Dave, that's great. Eric, that's great about business. Dave, I want to get back to the bloat walk. Okay, I want to talk about what's up, because I've been reading this stuff now, man, for over 2 decades. This is the moment. Okay, let's revisit this stuff. Because in all seriousness, I think that openness, though, and that's why we'll get to the business stuff like EliteFTS, but how it's been instrumental. What's that? Yeah.
So that's good.
Yeah, how it's been instrumental in terms of the longevity, I think, of the business. But I think what you do so well and how you straddle that line is that you're interwoven within the culture. So you're about that. And that's why, as someone who, reading some of your stories, you could tell the conviction that you had in everything that you did. Like the story that you just shared yourself, like, you know, getting bullied, joining wrestling. I couldn't help, Eric, but think about, like, you know, Pumping Iron, the story of Mike Katz, where he's talking about just like running on end, where he just wanted, like, there was something within him that he wanted to prove to himself. And there's these like great tonics that you hear amongst many lifting journeys of, you know, similarities, shared experiences, that unite them. I liked, I think, at least from my standpoint, especially reading like some of those articles and whatnot, that no one was vocalizing. Like there was that big one, Henry Rollins had the 200 pounds, will always feel like 200 pounds, but how those articles were so influential to generation by espousing particular beliefs or ideas that were commonplace within the community, but maybe not being vocalized. And that's why, like Iron Culture, it's about the culture of lifting. And so, just to jump back for a second, man, because you're talking about Westside, funny side story before we get into. Do you know someone? Because I know he's reached out. So the gym that I belonged to for a decade, Sean Kelly, Fortis Fitness at all. I know he's emailed you. You're like, bro, there's like literally thousands of people. Do you? Does that name ring a bell at all? It's totally cool if not.
A little bit,
Okay.
and not like I know, but the name I do. The name clicks.
Sure. Yeah. Because let me say this is that you talk about live, learn, pass on, and I want to get back to like Westside post that career and the things that you learned that helped shape then Elite FTS. Sean, as an example of how influential someone can be, Sean was at a pivotal point in his life where he used to box in his teenage years. He got overweight. He found Westside, right? Like Westside, like it's kind of a culture. It's like partially an identity. He went down to Ohio. He got certified with Louis, like Westside certified. Sean's like old school as they come. He has like the Westside hoodie on, all that stuff. But Louis treated him so well. He treated him so well that Sean, like, keep in mind, man, we're up in Canada. Sean opened up a gym and whatnot. He bought equipment from Louis, like the reverse hyper. So we have a reverse hyper, inverse light curl. We have at Fortis like a few Elite FTS pieces of equipment. Because Louis took the time of day to Sean, that was a big deal because Sean wasn't paying him, right? Sean was used to. Sean's now he's like almost 60. But he was used to people, they gatekeep it. Oh, you want to learn something? We'll come into my seminar. And Louis managed, he went for the, on the weekend, the brunch or whatnot, the breakfast and training and so forth, treated him so well, it left that impression. When I joined, man, years later, so in 2012, his gym at the time, Dave, wasn't busy at all. But he took the time for me and we just started training and he passed on his knowledge to me. He spent and he didn't need to. None of that, just like what you said with the wrestling coach. So I just want to echo that again because I really think it's this connected chain that's powerful. But to get back to you, man, and then Westside, and then the openness that you have, and then also Elite FTS, can you connect for us, Dave, the chains between your time then at Westside, your time as a competitive powerlifter, all the things you endeavor to do, and maybe some of those qualities or experiences or characteristics you learned that then maybe were innate within you already, but also help shape Elite FTS and how it went from there? Like, can you connect those two for us?
Yeah, I think some of the big things were, to me, my powerlifting career was over, right? So there's a big mental shift from graduating and getting on with like real life and all the other kind of shit. But there was this mental shift of all the way up into that point training wise, I was thinking in longer term progressions. Now, in this weird industry that we're in, people think long term is 6 months or a year. To me, long term's like 3 years, like a quadrennial. That's long term, So getting into powerlifting, it was like, okay, I want to have an elite total. What's a reasonable year at a time? I think I can get that done within 3 or 4 years. What do I need? And you just work back, right? And that's kind of how. Then it was after that, I want to get to the nationals. Then after the nationals, so everything kind of worked in that trajectory. Where now it changed mentally to where my mindset wasn't about, this is when I first got to Westside. It wasn't about, okay, here's where I want to be in 3 years, even though that's what Louis was really pushing. To me, it was, this may be my last year, every year for a few years. And that's a very self-destructive thing, right? Because to me, it's like, okay, this is now bonus. And that what if mentality. Like, well, what if I don't do, what if I don't do this max effort at this hard level every week? Is that going to, fuck me up if and you realize it fucks you up actually doing it that way. But it took me, a while to be able to get that. But that shift was like, took me to this level of competitiveness I didn't know I had from that. The other thing by going there is I always trained in little crews in gyms. And the first one was a powerlifting gym, but there were still some bodybuilders and stuff in there. But then when I was in college, they were still more hardcore type gyms, but they were still gyms. So it was either like back rooms. And so some of the people that they would train for a meet and then be gone, and there was consistency with like one person for a few years. When I got to Westside, that was everybody there was thought like me. I mean, they had different backgrounds, different histories, and they weren't all convicts. That's the one thing about the movie that drives me fucking crazy, by the way. But all different backgrounds, from college PhDs and, professors to, prison guards to trainers to, all these different things. But man, their passion was the same or greater than mine for what we were doing. So I didn't feel as much like an outcast like you did in the other places. Like even in those other gyms, you get caught up in this, maybe I'm too fat, you know what I'm saying? Because everybody, there's aesthetics, where the Westside is like, fuck it, we're measuring heads and bellies. It's like, holy shit, so it was a different type of culture shift there. How that, is that kind of answering what you're talking about or what you're asking? So a lot of it was just that culture thing where it was like, holy shit, this is like Valhalla, man. This is like what I've been looking for. And I also would have, I never really had this ego issue because I never thought I was as good as what I wasn't. Even now, I'll sit there and say I was a good power lifter, but I wasn't great. The stats will show that. Maybe 1 year I was ranked second, for my weight class throughout the whole thing. So I do now kind of wonder if I would have thought higher of myself, would I have been a little bit better? But at the same time, if it wasn't for all those other people, I would not even have been a top 100, that kind of, but now I was in a group of people that were way up there, way more mentally stronger than I was, physically stronger than I was. So that just being around that upped my game substantially. Because the numbers that you would think, and I use the example of, you take a kid today and he goes into a private powerlifting gym and everybody there benches 400 pounds. Just you're a 16-year-old high school kid, never trained anywhere else before. Their perception of strength is fucking warped, right? So within the first year, they're going to be benching 225, 275, hell, maybe even 300 pounds. They have no idea how strong that really is. Right? No clue that just amongst the general population that of everybody that lifts weights, that's what, like 95% stronger than everybody. But to that person, the perception's warped because they're like, fuck, I still am like 150 pounds off everybody else in here. So that also happened, going into Westside. But the biggest thing, then the other thing would be, I found other people that when I say the mental aspect, that were mentally willing to do almost whatever it takes to be able to get stronger, and that's a different level to be around. That was huge. And so that was able, looking back, that has given me a different perception on life. And when I will do podcasts with people now, I love doing podcasts with different people that have been all in. It's a weird thing to define, right? Because somebody's all in is dependent upon whatever their most all in's ever been, right? So it's just like hard work, So somebody may think they work hard, but they don't. If they put them around a bunch of other people that work really hard, but to them that's the hardest work they've ever done. So it's you got to anchor the definitions, and I don't think that we do it very well in the community with things like this. But now, when, say, a project comes up or a business or something like that, I know what my all in is. I've done it. I don't ever want to do that again. And I know what that is. And I know the ramifications and the sacrifices those around me have to make. Not me. I don't sacrifice anything. I'm doing what I love. It's all those around me. So it's interesting having that narrative and that dialogue with other people that have taken those things to that high level, who are honest about it. Because when they're really honest about it, there is that. Because I will ask them, are you willing to go all in on something again? In almost every single case, the answer is, fuck no. but I think you have, you know what I'm saying? They have that anchored experience to a point where they did it. It's something, doesn't matter. It could be painting. It doesn't matter what it is, something to this radically obscene level, obsessed level for this long period of time. So their anchor is set different. And that anchor being set so much higher, I think has helped me be able to find better balance, if there is such a thing, a few other things in business and so forth moving forward.
No, I think Eric, Dave, you perfectly answer that question, man. Because that all in, or have you been to the edge? You're a '70s guy, Van Halen line. Ain't talking about love, where he says, "I've been to the edge, I stood and looked down." I think what exemplifies some of the Westside lifters yourself, like I've mentioned that death squat video, like on T Nation and whatnot, is that there are different levels to this of what one is willing to sacrifice, and only once you've gone all the way there do you truly know what you're willing to sacrifice, and that definition amongst other people. Maybe there's some camaraderie. I want to hear Eric from yourself, because I think one thing I just want to say quickly, and then Eric, I want to hear your opinion, like the preps, the bodybuilding, and so on and so forth. With a Westside, with what you did, is that what I identified with as a youth is that not that aesthetics weren't important to me, but basically powerlifting was an avenue for an alternative option of doing some sort of lifting endeavor that wasn't only a focus on aesthetics, and it was an umbrella gateway towards other potential things. So like strongman competitors, like there's also strongman, but it's like an umbrella like side, and like Westside was kind of an emblem of what some of that represented, that you could choose to want to get strong, to become faster, to be more explosive, to be an athlete. There are other potential avenues and mechanisms that you can choose as a lifter besides just, being at the gym, like trying to get hunky or like whatever the hell. And then also, that's the thing too, everyone loves, like that's what we talked about, OGs, triple OGs, the most hardcore amplification of that. So it's like, oh, you think you're about this life? Like, yeah, you missed work, not a problem or whatnot. Or you're supposed to go out on like Friday night and you went and you trained, like that's cute, right? It's like, here's what we went. You're always kind of like testing the authenticity of someone. So when you see someone who's been all the way to the edge, you're like, oh, that's a defining point. And I think all those things came together, man. And that's why there's so many things that even for someone like myself that never took it to that level, there's a respect you see from someone taking it to the level. And there's a truthfulness that you identify where you're like, all right, I'll listen to this guy, as opposed to, once again, like a Joe Blow that's like, hey, oh, you want to blow up your squad? Here's like 3 tips, kids, like follow me. It just doesn't ring true. I do want to hear, though, I want to pass this off though, because I know Eric, this man's actually, he's done some preps and so forth. He's been to some places. He has had some life experiences. Some of the things that Dave said about all in and testing yourself to that limit. And I think, Dave, you've done a great job writing about it, vocalizing about it. Eric, is there any commentary you want to give just regarding that point before we go on to maybe like Elite FTS then, and so on and so forth?
Yes. And I don't know that I've actually ever heard someone articulate what you just said so well, Dave, that if you've truly gone all in, the experience of it, it was a bad thing. It was probably a dark time in your life. And when you hear people, and it happens all the time, I've done it. I think many of us have found our sense of pride, self-esteem, and acceptance through lifting. I mean, there's a lot of, like, you're not the only person who's ever been bullied who got into lifting weights, right? How often do we hear that,
Yeah.
Like even in the 40s, like the magazine-based articles are getting sand kicked in your face, and then you go lift weights, you come back, and you bully the bully. It's been part of the American male lifting experience.
Unfortunately,
I forgot about that one. Yeah, I forget. That's Steve Reeves, wasn't it? I forget who that was. It'll come to me in a minute. I know what you're talking about, though.
Atlas, Charles Atlas.
Charles Atlas. There you go.
Yep. And so, yeah, like I was immediately thinking of moments in my life, and I've had people, I don't tell this story very often because it was one of the worst days in my life. But it exemplifies where I was at and the coping strategies, or the only coping strategies that I really had at the time for something. But I have had people respond to it like, oh shit, that's hardcore. And to me, I'm like, this isn't, don't celebrate this. This is this tells you about something of where I'm at. And yeah, I have this life experience and I do benefit from it, but it's a double-edged sword that's really sharp on that other side. And so the day after my father took his own life, which a lot of people don't know that. I've publicly talked about it before, and I've raised some money for suicide awareness. I competed in a powerlifting meet, and it was in the middle of my '09 contest prep. And I continued that contest prep that was February. I'd started dieting in January. I went all the way to September, and I did 5 shows. I tore my hamstring during that prep. And just thank you to my wife, Barb, for staying with me through some very, like, I was not a sane man for a large part of that. I was very compartmentalized, and I wasn't making sound choices in that time of my life. So I never brag about the fact that I competed the day after that. I didn't know what else to do. I only knew that I felt some ability to express what was unexpressible through lifting. And in many ways, that was the only way I could really get out what was going on inside that I couldn't even articulate. But eventually I'd get in therapy, so this is the type of thing where when people kind of swing their dicks around, or their proverbial dicks, for those who are not dick owners. Apologies if I've been probably too male focused in the way I'm talking about this, but it is my experience. It's not always an indication that they haven't actually gone all in, because I get it. People puff themselves up. You want acceptance. I've done it. But one thing I do know is that the thing that they're thinking about at the time when they are celebrating their own hard work mentality probably wasn't that hardcore in the grand scheme of things, because they wouldn't want to talk about it if it was actually pushing themselves to the limit, or they wouldn't be talking about it in that way, at least in most cases. And I just wanted to echo that, because that's absolutely been my experience. It's been a point where I go, that's not healthy. Yes, I've transformed my perspective of that means I'm a very resilient person and I've overcome adversity. That's great, but I don't want to have to go through that again. I don't want anyone else to.
Yeah, well, you bring up a very interesting point where, training can be a incredible means of self-therapy, and it can also be a very toxic means of diversion, and it's that balance between there that when you see that debate of people saying that, training as a therapy, don't let it be your therapy. I'll push back on that, and I'll say things like, so clay is, painting is, my dog is, but my training can't be. Where, like I said, people do a shitty job of anchoring things, where what they're talking about is that toxic diversion. Like, okay, I'm so far into this that I can just push everything aside. I'll deal with this shit after the meet. I'll deal with this shit after the show. But guess what happens after the show? There's another one. Then there's off season. And then you end up suppressing shit you should be dealing with, a toxic diversion, over that period of time. And it's a blast dust type of mentality that falls in there. So again, both sides are always right. The answer is somewhere in the middle, but I commend you on speaking about it, because a lot of people don't speak about it and don't talk about it in that way, because some people will see and they'll say, that's awesome. That all in type thing is Stacy Burr, who I just had on the podcast, floored me with her honesty, because the part of the reason why she left the sport after having the all-time highest wilts, she hated who she became. Who says that? But if you get it, I get it. You know what I'm saying? Certain people are going to get it. A lot of other people are going to be like, so fucking confused. Wait a minute. But that's that. I think it's important to have those conversations about that. I don't know if we're ever going to find an answer, but at least if it can break down some of the confusion that people have, they enjoy training and it does help them with their general overall well-being, that's not a bad thing. Now if you're using it to be able to avoid situations that you ought to deal with, it's not a good thing.
I think that's really well said, Dave. And I just want to say thank you for bringing that up in the way you did. And I agree that it needs to be talked about, just so people are aware that this is a thing. Like, that it can be a lot of things, and you have to think, is this facilitating what I want in my life? So that you assess it on an individual basis. And that's actually just on your radar and you think about it. And that's all I want out of people, is just to realize that their, if you want to call it that, their relationship with the iron can be a bad relationship, just like one's in real life. And that's something that you have to work on and be aware of. So I'll leave it at that. I think this obviously could go down a whole other path, but I'm very curious about how these mental aspects and the things you've learned as a lifter, how did that translate into what we see today in Elite FTS, and how you brought that into the business world?
There's good and bad. I mean, I still have this very weird relationship with numbers that just because of bench PRs and squat PRs. And I'll give you a perfect example. You can monetize your Instagram reels. I don't know if you guys do. Some people do. Some people, they don't. You're not going to, I'm not making a shit ton of fucking money on it, right? But I watch it, right? So a couple months ago, it did okay, right? And then the month after, it didn't do okay. It dropped like half of what it was. Again, granted, I am not talking like numbers that are going to financially change anything. It might buy my cigars for a month, if that, right? But because that fell, I'm like, motherfucker, I need to get it back to where it was and get that and beat that PR, right? So that's been, because it flips on the 20th for me. So here I am coming into that last day and it's like $15 off. I would have posted 55 reels if I had to, just to be able to get. So that I'm working on that, because that becomes in business that can become a bad thing, because you always gravitate towards the biggest number, right? So I'll gravitate towards total sales, which are definitely important. But what's more important is what the net profit is. And they both matter, right? Because I still need the total sales for the expenses of the shit I have to pay for. But you become hyper driven. So that in a way, that's a good thing, because I become very number oriented on the numbers that matter. There's the key thing I want to get with this, where through powerlifting, especially through Westside, I had key indicators. My floor press correlated to my bench press. I knew exactly what that percentage was. My good morning had a correlation to the squat, my suspended good morning to the deadlift, my close grip incline to the bench. All these things I knew, and they always were dead on. So I didn't have to max out to me, know where my training was. I could just follow where these indicators were to know. So when I first started the company, the first thing I did was put together an Excel spreadsheet. And I'm like, what are the things that are going to matter? What are my max effort exercises? What are my key stuff? Like my rolling tricep extensions had a correlation to my bench. So I knew what that was. So what are my key strategic indicators? And this is before even having QuickBooks or any of the other shit. What's going to move me forward? And then what are the things I can't quantify? Like I can't quantify customer service at the time. Well, I can on a scale of 1 to 5. Does it suck? Is it good? Is it better than it was last month? And that's a huge thing that came from powerlifting into the business is that. And then learning how to, because the other thing that will happen is that Excel sheet starts, it's a 25 items. Then next thing you know, a year later, it's 325. And then, 2 years after that, you're back down to 12 things. Then when it gets really, really on point, you're only looking at a couple, right? Because then those two can at least lead you and be indicators of, okay, this is fucked up. I need to look here. Kind of the David Lee Roth green M&M story or whatever it was. It's people that don't know, he used to request M&Ms or whatever it was, Skittles, I don't know. And
brown M&Ms, 100%.
The back room, yeah. In the back room, and he didn't want to see one green one or whatever was in there. And if he walked in there and saw there was a green one, he knew something else was fucked up. So that was it's a terrible example, by the way. But if you have certain things that you keep your eyes on that can be indicators to go look here, then you don't have to look at every single thing all the time to know where it is. That was a big factor. the other big factor was a realization that a lot of people don't want to talk about in business is powerlifting was a full-time endeavor for me. It didn't stop when I left the gym. It's granted, while I did push to be able to gain more weight, there was a point of being too fat. The extra adipose tissue isn't going to help. There's a point where it does. There's a point where it became too much. So I had to watch, what I was eating, not so much the foods, but the caloric intake, and then hope that the caloric intake was covering my macronutrient requirements, which it can get fucked up so bad that you could not do that. It's very hard, very rare, if probably impossible. But I did have some conscious effort with that, where starting my own business, and as it's continued for all these years, there's no 40-hour work week, man. There's, business starts when I get up in the fucking morning and check the email, or text messages from the night, and it stops when I fucking go to bed. It's 80, 90-hour work weeks, and it's always that way. And it's the problems there's always weak points. There's always problems. There's always situations. It's, again, which one do you need to deal with and how important is it? All this stuff comes from powerlifting, and from that. And a lot of it comes from experience in business as well. The other huge one is understanding where your ignorance is. What do I think I'm right on right now that I'm absolutely wrong about? And that's the one that freaking stresses me out like you can't believe, right? But the problem with that one is you can become so consumed with it that you do nothing. And doing nothing is always going to keep you in the same place. So say you're trying to decide if you need to hire a certain person. You can be thinking about that decision for 4 months. You still haven't done anything different than when you started the decision-making process. In that 4-month period of time, you could have either done it, or on the other end, firing somebody. You don't want to let them go, but 4 months later, you can be an indecision forever. And powerlifting, you can't be, and then the training, you can't be in an indecisive mood for long, because you have to be more proactive. If you have a weak point or something holding one of your lifts back and you don't address it, you think it's going to make your lift get better. Actually, it's going to make it worse. So the indecision will make it worse. Now, I can go on and on and on. I mean, it's all the lessons I've kind of learned in life have been learned in the gym. It's the mind-numbing ones, or what are the ones I didn't learn. That.
So I guess we've covered a lot of ground, and it's been really just a joy to have you drop some wisdom in your experiences. Let's talk about the more contemporary period. Actually, what we were talking about a little bit off air before we started recording, it's been, I feel like, and it may just be that, I'm aging and it's a little different than when I first got into it myself. And I'm imagine you can probably relate that things are changing at a faster pace, not just that they're changing, but they're changing faster. So like there was a period where, it was the forums, right? And then there was a period where it was Facebook. And Facebook felt the same for a while. And it was like, okay, I'm taking my blog and I'm putting it on Facebook and the blog. This is not that different. And then Facebook's algorithm changed. Instagram came out. Instagram's algorithm was changed. TikTok's out. So it could just be that I am just a complainy boomer who sucks. But maybe it is changing faster. And one thing I have been impressed with, and that I know you pay attention to, is that you've done a really good job of not necessarily being an early adopter. I think very few of us truly are. And it's hard to do that if you're not born in the generation where the things are happening. And that's me speaking as a 39-year-old. So, I mean, I'm sure hopefully you can relate, or it just means I'm really bad at everything. But you have done a good job with EliteFTS staying up to date and evolving as the information age evolves. And I just would love to hear more about how you do that effectively, your philosophies behind it, and what do you think that what I see as a success comes from?
Okay. There's a couple of different ways I look at this. Is there's myself, and then there's the brand. Okay, where I have to be very conscious of how much I influence the brand. Now, granted, EliteFTS, Dave Tate, it's always going to be kind of synonymous, but if it becomes too synonymous, I hurt my valuation. Not saying that I'm looking to sell the brand, but as an indicator of any brand, you need to have a big, what is the value of your brand, right? Not what is the value of Dave Tate, what is the value of EliteFTS? So if once a year, I'll spend time really, really going through and saying, okay, if I was to buy EliteFTS, what would I change? What would I do? And a lot of times the first change I would make would be fire me, right? So I'm serious, right? So you got to ask why. Because there's traits I need to fix. There's skills I have to learn. There's things that I have to keep in there because if somebody was to acquire the company, then what's my job security? And I can also guarantee if I don't put the time and the effort into those things, it's not going to go where I want it to go. And we are and I've always been a very slow growing company, very slow. I don't think I've had 1 year where we've grown more than, I think 10% was the highest growth year over year. Very slow growing company. I'm not going to bitch about it because I'd rather be slow growing for 25 years than dynamic growing in debt. So where I'm going with this is if I feel my name is becoming too prominent with the company, I have to pull back, right? And so I've done that in the past with my training logs. I took them completely off. I've done it before where I became one of the more popular writers on our site, quit writing for a year. Did it with social media a couple of years ago, pulled off entirely. Because I have to know if I pull off entirely, what's that going to do to our sales of the business? Are they going to drop? Are they going to stay the same? What's going to happen? Oddly enough, every time I pulled off, the sales have gone up. So that's I'm just going to say that's a spurious correlation and just leave it at that for now, because my ego can't take the other hit from there. But that's the first thing that I put a lot of awareness into, because there still is this retail operation that supports the content. Now, when I do that, I have to have people in place to be able to be voices, either the sponsored lifters that I used to have, the sponsored coaches that I used to have. It could be our columnists, it could be our writers, and as the world changes, right? So now it's that's more who are the people that are on the videos, that are the YouTube videos. What are the personality? Who are the people that are going to be there? How do they fit? How do they fit the brand? And sometimes there's gaps where it's too risky for me to do that because I don't have those other people to be able to kind of support that and to be some kind of front face. That's the first aspect I pay a lot of attention to. The second aspect would be what the content is in regards to the medium that it is. And it's, as I said earlier before we started, I'm not an early adapter. I can't afford to be. I don't have the financial resources to put people all over the place. And this repurposing content, it's a great idea, and it's a great concept. Do it. Just go do it. For anyone that thinks this is a great idea, big Gary Vee fans, fine, okay, you're a one-person show. Go do it. Take your video, chop it up into 30, 20 shorts, start putting them, and then make sure that the shorts are a little bit different for YouTube than they are for Instagram and they are for TikTok. Write the description. Tell me how that works for you. Just let me know how that goes, right? Because there's a lot of fucking work that goes into that, a lot of time that goes into that. And so you have to pick where there's going to be the greatest ROI. So going back to my indicators, I track different social networks that we're on. I'm tracking the indicators, and granted, this is what drives me crazy with this shit is I can't trust the indicators because how do I know that they're not bullshit? Because I'm getting the information from somebody else and I can't see the source of how they're getting the information. And I'm not even a scientist, but I understand that's fucking important, to know what the source is. Where's this number coming from? Our algorithm. What the fuck does that mean? At least on my own site, I can see, through things. So I try to have, back channels like Google Analytics or other things to be able to show, what's the conversion coming from this site to just be able to see. It's like hiring a marketer for your site. Immediately they're going to give you this huge percentage. Hey, we did $30,000 of sales for you this last month, and you're thinking, oh, wait a minute, that should mean my sales went up $30,000, but they're the fucking same as what they've always been. And they play this little game, and then I get paranoid. I'm like, so if I fired you right now, I should make $30,000 less, right? And then you'd fire them, and you still make the same. So in other words, you're fucking lying. So you got to have a backup for those indicators. Know what indicators are important for you, right? And then from there, at least from what I'm seeing on our end, the medium content is the hardest content. So the long form podcast does well. At least it provides more spaces for ad revenue if you're on YouTube. So you get that from there. It provides more spaces for ad revenue if it is a podcast, and you're utilizing ad revenue in there, and it allows for a more engaging conversation. You guys have done a couple hundred podcasts now, right? Some guests are a struggle to get through. Some of them take 20 or 30 minutes before it really gets rolling. Now, if you are limited to 20 minutes of good content, and you already lost the people in the first 25 minutes, you got a 3-hour thing going. Maybe it takes 15, 20 minutes for some people, but then you got 2.5 hours of fucking gold that you can clip. You can do other kind of stuff with later. That right now, from what I'm seeing, is people are not loving, but that's good content. That's put in the car when you drive someplace. They're listening to it when they're working, which is actually a terrible idea, by the way. But they're listening to it while they're working. I'm on the podcast now, so keep working, guys. And then the shorter form. But the shorter form, I don't really know what that means. So for me, we're doing a lot of the podcast clips now, which I've just hired contractors to be able to do. Because what's the worst case scenario here? Say it doesn't work, but more people know that we have a podcast. That's advertising, right? So I try to look at all the content that goes out that's in the shortest form, is how can this actually be advertising without it really being just marketing? And it's too short to really be content marketing, but it's still marketing. Hey, look, there's a podcast. This person was on the podcast. Maybe you want to go to the podcast. As long as you make sure to put in the description, it's a fucking podcast and where to go, for the podcast. That little weird medium area, articles, 15, 2,000 word articles. It's just stagnant. It hasn't really dropped hard for us. For some of the sites that other people I know, they're still doing good. It's not growing, but it's holding, which to me personally, I think that's the best content. I really long form. If you get to the back end of an interview, is probably better, but that's really the best content. Boom, because it's not salesy. It's good. It's strong. It takes effort. I think that to learn, people should need to put a little effort, into it, because then they're going to engage and they're going to use what they learn. If they put no effort into what to learn, how are they actually going to use that? What I don't know, and Omar may know better, is how that's going to affect YouTube as far as that 7-8 minute range video that's in there. That I don't know. We're still trying to figure that fucking thing out. I've been on YouTube for 15 years. I've got 140,000 subscribers, and I full transparency, I didn't even monetize it until 2020. Never even had it turned on, which now I'm like, you're an idiot, like, oh my God, you're an idiot. But so it's where it's going. I don't think anybody can answer that. I think the best question is to answer for those people who have an interest in this is, where can you be? This is a caveat here. Where can you be your authentic self? Because that's the one thing nobody can duplicate. But that also doesn't mean that it's going to be comfortable when you start. I still have a hard time getting and talking to my phone. right? And I know for a fact if I started talking to my phone more on Instagram and even on YouTube, if it was just, YouTube Live, take my phone and just film stuff, it would do very, very well. And I know the only reason I'm not doing it is because I'm uncomfortable doing it. And that's on me. That's my problem. And I will get comfortable doing that. But that, you see what I'm saying? A lot of people will use that as their excuse to be able to say, this isn't going to work for me. And it's like, no, dude, when I first started writing articles, that was fucking hard too. Blogs are really hard too. It's just that there's a certain degree of hiding behind the curtain when you're writing, but it still wasn't hard. And actually, when you think back, none of it's really hard. It's just taking the actions needed to do that. So wherever you can be authentic. Now, if you can't film yourself and be authentic, don't do it. Because after doing this for so long, I don't know. I've never been fake or tried to be somebody that I'm not. I've been around for 25 years. I wouldn't say I've been the most relevant. I also wouldn't say I've been the least relevant. But I don't have to sit there and try to act like somebody that I'm not. Now, could I change my tonality, to be able to sell a little bit better? Yes, those are all things that I can work on. And you can do that and still be your authentic self. I think that's where people get confused. They think that if they change tonality or if they put a little bit more marketing behind what they're doing, that means that's not their authentic self. And it is. It's just their excuse for not wanting to do the work necessary. But again, keep the ROI to be able to know. But don't say those Instagram lives, they don't work because you suck at them. Put enough time in it to at least figure out if it sucks or not. This is what season is this with the podcast. It's season 3 or whatever it is. It's still not where it needs to be. But, every year, I'll go through how many number of episodes and boom, stop. Let's analyze. Where are we? Is this breaking even? It's different. When you're a company, it's different too, right? If I wanted to try to compete in the YouTube world with most of the YouTubers out there, I got to pay a video guy, so I may have 2 salaries out there plus my own time to be able to compete with somebody that's doing this by themselves, right? That's like a David and Goliath type of thing. You might have the resources to be able to do this, but you also need to understand you're not going to break even on it until you're pulling in maybe $150K a year. Now, go back to all the other YouTubers and say, hey, guys, how many of you are making $150K a year? Most aren't. So this is where I think people get lost. So then what is the backup strategy? How's this content going to help with what you're trying to do? And what's the ROI, I guess is what I'm trying to say in the condensed. Define your ROI. It doesn't have to be monetarily. What is the return on the investment for the time that you want to put into this? Track it and then make modifications to it. And if it doesn't work out the way that you didn't think it worked out, were you being fucking lazy about it? Now, good effort, not being lazy, didn't work out, move on to something else. And it doesn't fit your demographic. That's another tricky one, right? Because TikTok supposedly is this very young demographic. So for most of us, it probably doesn't fit. But I also made this mistake with YouTube. Years ago, I'm like, oh, it's too young of a demographic. But you know what? They fucking get older. They grow into your demographic. It's amazing the stupid shit we miss sometimes. So let's assume that the TikTok demographic is super, super young. Well, they're going to grow into your demographic. What are they going to know? But at the same time, I'm now being told 50 and plus year olds are the highest, growing demographic on TikTok. Well, again, what's that mean? Like highest growing? The fuck? Like, can you? This is getting. I'm not a scientist by any means, but I'm not an idiot. Can you tell me what that means? Like, did it go from 10 people to 30? And you're saying that there's a 300% fucking growth now because it went from 10 to 30 people. but you're going to say 300% growth.
Yeah.
But see, they don't. That's the confusing part with that. All I'll say is I'm a little bit different than everybody else, and I realize you can't do everything, and you can't do it all. And then if you have the staff that's committed to this, it's still limited resources. And then sometimes, if it is staff, you want to compare what's the salary of one staff member. Let's say if it's to make, I just had to do this, so I'll use this as an example, to make clips of the podcast videos, not the full podcast production, but the 5-minute clips, the shorts and all that. All right, what's the cost to hire somebody to come in-house and do that? And if I did that, how many clips and how many videos am I going to get per week, right? So say on a $45,000, $50,000 a year salary, I get maybe 3-4 clips per week and 15 shorts. What's it going to cost me to outsource that? I could outsource that to somebody for $150, $200 for the same exact number of stuff at a fraction of the cost. So for what I was internally paying somebody to do for, a period of time, I've 500 times my outcome and deliverables by outsourcing. 500 times. Because now you're paying by deliverable. You see what I'm saying? So now I'm paying per clip, per short, whatever it's going to be. What's the cost on that? Negotiate it before you're paying a salary, right? So now are there other things associated with that salary? You got to keep that in mind too, right? So there's more to just that. You know what I'm saying? But especially as the at-home work and gig work or whatever you want to call it keeps expanding, a lot of these things that we think to become way more affordable, and only because you're paying for the actual end product. You want to get in a YouTube, right? And you don't know shit about editing. I don't know shit about editing. I'm not going to say that this is a good idea, but you can go to Fiverr and hire an editor for, very, very cheap. Film raw content, set it out. They ended up doing it. That can probably be done way cheaper than if you were to hire somebody in-house and have to pay a salary for that, especially if you're just testing the market.
I've been reflecting as you've been talking about all this stuff, Dave, that anyone who's paying attention will not be surprised as to why you've been successful as an athlete, a coach, and as a businessman, because your brain immediately goes to, I need a metric to gauge success, evaluate whether things are working or not. I'm going to assume there's things I don't know. I'm going to regularly self-evaluate, and then I'm very solution-oriented. That's at least what I heard in all of that. And that's a philosophy that seems to be a through thread in all the stages of your career, both as athlete, trainer, content creator, and businessman. And I think there's a lot to be learned there of just paying attention and having benchmark metrics that you can gauge your success on, that are like, you were talking about the correlations between certain movements and how you could keep track of one to know about the other. And now you're talking about being able to track. And while you're frustrated by the kind of the black box algorithms that we don't really get to know how they work when we're dealing with, putting our marketing outsourced to a social media company, which unfortunately is just the way of the world for the most part. But trying to get at what you can. So anyway, I just found that very interesting, and I'm probably reflecting something that the listeners are like, yeah, we could tell. It was very obvious, but I think it's kind of cool. So
yeah, I mean, it's simple to say, here's all the things that we don't know. But, to me, it's easier to figure out what are the things that you do know and how can you figure out how to quantify it. Even if you're wrong, it's better. Like if your metrics are wrong, it's better than none. Like, come on. I mean, it's some of it's like common sense type. The only other thing I would add to that is for people to understand it's not about you, right? And I think the longer you're in this industry, the more you understand that. And as I talked about that growth curve, I'm guilty of it. I'm sure we're all guilty of it. As you're trying to come up on that curve, yes, we are using positioning the best way that we can. And we're learning when we're trying to figure out, how can my voice be heard over this person's voice or this person's voice? And we don't realize that all voices can still be heard. I think you learn that over a period of time. And hopefully the younger generation now is learning from us, that I tried to avoid as many debates as I possibly could because I never really saw the point of it. And to be completely honest, if I'm going to debate with somebody that's in the scientific community, I'm going to lose, because all I'm going to have is, experience. And now you got what comes out of a debate between experience and science? That's a terrible debate. Have experience debate experience, have science debate science, but have discussions across the board. But what happens if over a period of time is you begin to realize, if I'm expanding the energy to be able to put content out or to be able to put this stuff out or to even sell a product or a service or whatever it's going to be, I'm not, well, I do use the gym equipment I sell, but you're not using your own product and service. Let me reframe that. You're not your customer, right? You're putting the stuff out for your fucking customer. Speak to them. Answer their questions. Speak to the things they want to know about. Don't just read an article or see somebody make a post and say, "Oh, fuck him, he's wrong. That's all bullshit. I'm gonna make a note, and then later I'm gonna make my own post, saying why this is bullshit." And so what some people will do, and I'm guilty of this, I've done it in the past. I would wait 3 or 4 months, and then I would make the post. That way it didn't look like I was actually calling that person out. Other people will do it, boom, immediately because they want that traction of that kind of stuff. Where the only point I'm trying to make with that is that of best service for your customer, right? Now, if your customer is to grow traffic and all the other stuff, maybe it is. But that's still answering the same question. Is that debate of the best service for your customer? If you're trying to create a channel that's based upon debates, 100%, fucking go for it. But if what you're trying to put out there is something else, answer what they want. It's not about you. And people, I think we can all agree that have been in the industry for a while, people spend too much time focusing on their positioning, how they look. Are my peers going to think I'm smart? The fuck cares? But that's part of it.
I mean, geez, there's too many gems. I feel like I'm in a mine that's collapsing that has not been mined yet, and the gems are falling on me every time you speak, Dave.
Well, I can circle this one back though too, to get it away from business though, is the same thing that I just said applies to if it's somebody that you're working with in the gym, right? Are you having them do what you want them to do or what they need to do, right? If coming from a powerlifting background, if I have a powerlifter that's in fucking horrible shape, just physically horrible shape, right? Do they really need to be going through a powerlifting program at this point in time? Or do they need to be fucking riding the bike, walking on the treadmill, building GPP, doing fucking, kettlebell swings, ropes, whatever the hell we need to fucking do to be able to get their blood circulation and their heart rate to a position that they can even recover from the training? What do they, you get what I'm saying? It's, and for me, it'd be so easy. Like, no, I need to stick them on a box. I need to have them do this. They need to do board presses because that's what they think that they need to do. Yeah, no, they want to get stronger. So it's the same. It's exactly the same thing I just said about the business part. And you got to focus on who that customer and that client is. They may come and say, look, I want to do the best conjugate stuff in the world. No, you need to get in fucking shape. Sorry, I can kind of mix some of the fun shit in there, for it. But the truth is the truth. And then we go that direction. That, again, from the gym is what transpires and comes out from there.
I love it. Yeah, no, I greatly appreciate all your perspective, Dave. It's, you're talking about how you sit down with people on your podcast and you learn things. That's how I feel in this one. So, no, it's made me think about some of the ways I operate in the business space. So I just want to say I appreciate that. Omar, are there things that you wanted to cover? I think we've covered a lot of ground. We've gotten into the modern era and how Dave is currently thinking. We started with his inception and how that became EliteFTS, and we've fortunately had a lot of awesome tangents that have given us a lot of great insights as well.
Oh no, I have a final question for Dave. I'll say that one thing I do want to touch on when you said the place you could go where you could be your most authentic self, I actually think is an underrated, powerful metric for anyone that wants to create content, meaning that you can't be all places at all times. You know, TikTok is a certain structure where it's short form, it's snappy editing, it's a whole bunch of other things. If that's not you, that's okay. What you said, Dave, just because you might have reservations towards doing something doesn't mean you shouldn't potentially participate in it. But most people will gravitate towards a particular style of content where they excel at, like a long form content. So articles that you write or the podcast. That's why I think that like the table talk, I think personally is G money all day. Just because you allow someone to explore a concept more in depth, and there's a market for that. There's an audience for that. There's also an audience for people that want really snappy stuff. And I think I would just say, from an outside observer, not that this is like, the calculations that go into the equation, but if with EliteFTS, like you're selling equipment isn't like novelty buys. So like people that are on TikTok or like, let's say social media platforms where their total time spent interacting with you is less overall. In order to get a sale for a novelty buy, you don't need to be interacting with someone for a long period of time. You don't need the 5 points of marketing, any of those things. So they'll have an impulse buy. Now, on the other hand, if you're selling something like equipment that might cost a little bit more, someone might consider it over a longer period of time. Well, one, they want to get to know you, not just Dave, but also the company. Mm-hmm. And by proxy of that, like something like a table talk where it's a 2-3 hour conversation, over a certain period of time, like we've done, almost 200 episodes. Let's say someone listens to every single episode throughout a year. That's 100 hours that they've been sitting with us. One TikTok clip is 15 seconds. Even if you post 4 a day, that's a minute. That's great. But let's say you do that over a certain period of time. That's 1 minute for a month then. That's 30 minutes for a year. That's 6 hours. 6 hours versus 100, even if you're posting at the maximum intensity. Mm-hmm. So I do think everyone will naturally gravitate, almost self-organize towards where their content should be. And some people like snappier content. They're more comfortable doing that. I think one of the unique parts, Dave, when you said about getting in front of the camera that YouTube did, is that it became tailored content. And what I mean when I say that, I think a podcast is the rawest form for anyone because there's no cuts, right? We're just talking in the three of us. Mm-hmm. So you're having a dynamic conversation. You're the most exposed, in my personal opinion. YouTube, interestingly enough, was the first place where editing became important. In fact, you could obfuscate someone through all the fancy, you could make someone seem more interesting, more dynamic, more likable, more charismatic to what you said, right? Like if you wanted to be more salesy, have a certain intonation, you could insert like a clip, just the way you cut it up, you could create an arc and a structure so that people that like to, author their way of creating content, that's cool. But like for everyone, they'll find it. And I do think, just to double down on it, I think what there's not enough of, Dave, at least in this space, are things like table talk, just because people that are willing to go into those conversations, into the weeds with them, the experience that they have, that is uncommon because you need a certain amount of experience in order to accrue and carry those conversations and be relatable over time and space with other people. So like I just want to say that I think that's invaluable. Yeah. I do, like I said, I think there's a space for everyone. And what you said about like EliteFTS where like all these voices can be heard, but I do think it's interesting. You find your pocket. On that note, then my final question, man, would be, you said you like to plan things out or whatnot. So it's not EliteFTS like 3 months from now or 6 months from now. But let's say now, I do feel, at least from a content structure, from an outside observer, I feel like you guys you're in a flow. For yourself, EliteFTS, and everything you endeavor to do, what does the future hold? Like you don't have to reveal your cards, of course, that like you have your grand strategy. But what are some of the directions? What are some of the things in the future then, let's say?
All right, well, one of the things I put a lot of effort into since 2020, because while it was a big year for the industry, it wasn't the greatest year for us. Keep in mind, we're a retailer, right? So we had a lot of people that went direct to market and just cut us out, right? So that's when I realized, now shit, there's a big vulnerability here, and you try to have risk management and everything, so you got suppliers in multiple states, multiple countries. who the fuck ever expected the whole world was going to shut down? You know, you try to protect yourself by having multiple, you know, slots and stuff like that. We're fine through the whole thing, but the biggest takeaway that I had from that was the vision of the company of live, learn, and pass on, and to be able to give back was vulnerable because it was 100% dependent upon equipment sales or just regular, you know, all the other sales. And I've never had that gut wrenching feeling like that before. It's like this, no, we need to make this self-sustainable. So if everything was to get wiped out, the content can continue, right? And so that means, you know, being able to pay for the staff to do the content, to pay for all the resources associated with the content. I'm not even putting my salary into that equation or my time, which is a lot when it comes into the content. But how do we get to the break-even point of that? And then is it scalable? And how can we make it scalable? So we're not there to the break-even point yet, but we're getting there, right? Because it's a balance again, right? Because while we have decent downloads, we have a big digital footprint. I mean, we have a lot to offer. You know, unlike other podcasts, you know, we got a newsletter, an email blast newsletter. We have social media following. I got my own following. We got more advertising metrics for a custom advertising package than pretty much anybody as far as reach goes. You know, so it's there. So we have that package, but I don't want to get into a position where I have to start taking advertisers I don't necessarily want to promote, right? And in this industry, that's most of them. For me, that's I'm just being honest. That's most of them. And it becomes very gray with me with the supplement company, right? Because I'm not saying supplements don't work. You're from the science community. You know where I'm coming from. Some have value. Most are overhyped like a motherfucker, right? So what does that do to the overall credibility of anything that goes out from there? I don't know the answer to that. I could be wrong. I don't even want to think about the question at this point in time. I just table it, you know, so I don't know. But if that can be balanced, you know, with, I think there's a subscription model that we have for the table talk, like a donation type. It's a Discord thing we just set up, you know, so it's kind of like I don't want to say it's a paywall because it's not. It's supporting the podcast, but anyhow, it's a balance is what I'm saying. I should be better at selling what the fuck the service is, right? But the point of it is to provide more value for what the podcast is, but to make it so we're never 100% dependent on advertisers. So the advertisers are cool. The advertisers plus this, boom, does it, you know, covers it and can be scalable and then go from there. And so that's where I'm putting a lot of my focus now is to be able to get that solid and then get it to a position because it's scalable. Because the only place that can really be scalable is to be more podcast or more episodes. To be more episodes requires obviously more of my time because we only do these in the gym. That's part of the authenticity, as part of the appeal, is this is in the middle of our gym. You know, and that's, you know, and people are so much more comfortable because they're sitting in a gym. You know, you can't believe how much more comfortable people are when they're in there. But for me to do more episodes, I need to hire people to do some of the other work that I do at EliteFTS, right? Some of the marketing stuff. So that is there. That's where that is. And I'm confident in. Now, the path obviously is always going to change. It's never the linear path on what it is, but I'm confident that the model that we have is the right model. The people we may have to bring in more people, different contractors, all that's just part of business, you know, and how it scales and how it's going. But finally, you know, after 2 seasons, I've been looking for this since 2020, not so much in the podcast, in any content, without having to get wrapped up into a digital product, long sales copy, stuff like I didn't want to get wrapped up into that. I don't want to get wrapped up into the online training market. It's very saturated. It's very oversaturated. It's very competitive. And that's going to require, when you're talking about a time commitment, now that's I can't do 280-hour-a-week jobs, so it's, and to be completely, so if I went that route, then who's on the podcast? Because now a lot of people who are going to want to come on the podcast aren't going to want to come because they're going to think that there's too much of the scarcity mindset in our industry. But, I can't do this because I'm just going to be giving his company more clients where I don't have clients. You come on our podcast, you get more clients because I don't do this. So I think, the foundation, the structure has taken I don't even know what year it is now, 2022, 2 years to find the right foundation. And it just happened to be the podcast where I really didn't know. This season is when I started to see this is the base of whatever's going to fall behind that. And the co-host was a good idea, but it may end up being a good idea later, but it's different. It's when you're trying to take somebody through a track, right? It's when I'm podcasting with somebody, I'm taking them through a journey, right? That's the only way I know how to explain it. So I take them through a journey, but then we go down these rabbit holes. You guys kind of did it to me, so you know what I'm talking about. So 100%. You go down you go down the rabbit hole, but you got to remember to go back and keep going because the listeners still want a fucking answer to the question that you originally asked. Yeah. So you got to get back to that and go back through there, and that's really hard when there's two people, that are kind of interviewing the same thing. So it ends up just being this monster mash of content, which has its niche and it has its mold. I mean, you guys worked very well together, by the way. So I'll give you that, because you stayed right on that. You could tell you've done 200 together, so that's part of the whole thing. But I think it was after Matt Brown, when I interviewed him, that after that was over, it's like, holy shit, this is exactly what I want to talk to people about. And that was also the same one that I put a fuck ton of front end research into. Because admittedly, I respect MMA. I don't follow it. I don't know shit about it. I know training. So it's like, fuck, I need to know at least about this guy. So you're listening to all the, researching the shit out of it, listen to all these different podcasts, put a ton of time into it. And then it's like, I'm like, oh shit, guess what? I just remembered. I need to do 3 or 4 times more work than anybody else in the industry that's doing this. I need to put more time into it. I need to shut the fuck up and let the guest speak. I need to, and now I'm watching and I hate the news, right? But I'm watching good journalists that have longer interviews, like 60-minute type shit. I don't care about the topic. I care about what are the questions. How are they carrying the conversation? How are they? Because they're fucking professionals, right? So people freak out when I tell them this. Hey, you watch? I'm like, no, man, you don't understand what I'm listening to. I don't give a fuck what they're talking about. How do they carry the conversation? How do they get them to talk about shit that they don't want to talk about? Mm-hmm. And do it tactfully. Right now I'm passionate about that. And as a business owner, I got to control that though too. Because going back to that all-in thing, if I lean too far into that shit, I'm going to let other responsibilities fall that I can't let fall.
Dave, it shows though, I could say, because you put in the time, you put in the effort. There's a reason why we brought up Table Talk, and there's a reason why we come full circle here, because there is no escaping the amount of effort that it takes to put into something in order to be great. And I think that is the tonic in this entire episode, and that's why it's cool to ask that last question, coming kind of full circle of what the future, kind of gazing into the future. But I think you've done a fantastic job of carrying the listener through your own personal journey, but then how it's relational to them. And I think that is the power of these long talks. So I just want to say, because we actually have, so we don't have a staff here. We have, shout out to our man Brandon, shout out to Kai who does the timestamps, is we're going to have a link.
Those are a bitch, man. So let me shout out to Kai too.
Yeah.
Those, I've had to do those because somebody would forget them.
Yeah.
And I'm like laying in bed with my ear pods on, like tapping this shit out and listening to it at 3. Those suck.
Dave, that was my job, and then I failed miserably. So then Eric, he's like, "Oh, I got a PhD student." Kai, I'm like, "Thank you, Kai." So we have Kai, what I was gonna say. He's gonna link in the description all your socials, everything that you want. So we implore everyone to check that out. But I just want to say, Eric, before I close it out, anything you want to say in closing, my man?
Just that it's a huge honor to have you on, and I just greatly appreciate your transparency, your honesty, and just you being you, because I think there's a lot of gems that people can learn from, whether they're in business, training, sport, or just anywhere within the industry where they're trying to make an impact. And what's so obvious to me is that your core values at EliteFTS are what carry you through. And I think a lot of people lose sight of those things. And yours are completely related to, like you said, planting those seeds and making sure there's green space in our space for the future. And I love that.
No.
Yes.
100%.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
No, 100%. I just want to echo it, Dave. That's been a full circle moment for myself, for the podcast, to have you on and to see that continuation. We love to see that. So please check out everyone. Links are in the socials, are in the description. We want to thank the Iron Culture listening for to listen to another episode of the podcast. You could go ahead and leave a rating review on iTunes. Speaking of algorithms, it does tend to help us out. 5 stars is the typical rating and review, but we'll let you make your own informed opinion on that. And we'll be back every single Monday from now until the end of time. We'll catch you in that next episode.